It was the kind of winter morning that could freeze your bones just by stepping outside. A biting cold whipped through the trees, and the snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, coating the ground in a layer of white. Inside the stable, the mare lay still on the hay, her breathing shallow, her legs trembling from the strain of the night. Her foal stood beside her, weak and fragile, its tiny legs struggling to support its frail body. The man stood by the barn door, gazing out at the ice-coated world. His heart sank as he watched the scene unfolding before him. The mare, a strong and proud Mustang, had been injured, and now, with the weather turning harsher by the minute, both she and her newborn foal were at risk of perishing in the bitter cold. The barn was small, cramped, and not designed for the frigid temperatures outside. The warmth inside was fading fast, and the man could feel it in his bones. He had a choice to make, a choice that would define the rest of their lives. The barn doors were frozen shut, and the wind outside howled with an unforgiving force. If he opened it, there was no guarantee that they would survive the cold or the elements. But if he left them inside, trapped with no escape, they could suffocate in the enclosed space, too weak to survive another night. The man took a deep breath, his eyes lingering on the mare's eyes, the silent plea in her gaze. He'd always cared for his animals, but this was different. He knew what was at stake. The foal's tiny form quivered in the corner, barely able to stand, its little body fighting for warmth. The man's heart clenched. He knew what he had to do, but the fear of failure hung over him like a storm cloud. Would opening the barn doors be enough to save them? Or would his decision be their undoing? His fingers gripped the handle of the door, the cold metal biting into his skin. A decision had to be made. And soon. The wind's bitter howl grew louder as minutes slipped away, transforming the stable into a frozen chamber of mounting dread. Outside, the storm raged on relentlessly, icy gusts whipped through the barren landscape, and the snow fell in an unyielding barrage that threatened to bury hope beneath its weight. Inside the cramped barn, the atmosphere was saturated with tension. The mare's eyes, brimming with a silent plea, shifted between the frail form of her foal and the conflicted man standing by the door. Each beat of her heart mirrored the urgency of their plight. Within the barn's dim light, the man wrestled with the escalating fear that every second could be their last. The temperature was plummeting, and he could see his breath shrouding the air as if the cold itself were conspiring to sap their strength. Memories of past winters, bitter, merciless encounters with nature, raced through his mind. In those moments, survival had been a daily battle, a struggle defined by the razor-thin line between hope and despair. Now, he was confronted with the ultimate test, a decision that held the power to either preserve these fragile lives or condemn them to the unforgiving embrace of winter. The barn door, encased in a thick layer of ice, stood as a formidable barrier, a tangible representation of his inner turmoil. Each time he grasped the cold metal handle, the chill seemed to seep into his very soul. The door would not yield easily, its frozen grip a constant reminder of the harsh conditions outside. He hesitated, torn between the perilous prospect of exposing the mare and foal to the bitter elements and the grim possibility of leaving them confined in a space that was slowly becoming their icy grave. Outside, the storm's fury only intensified. The mare's soft whinnies, laced with pain and desperation, cut through the clamor of the wind. The foal's feeble whimpers added a haunting melody to the chaotic symphony of nature's wrath. The man's heart pounded with every creak and groan of the barn structure. In the midst of this sensory onslaught, his internal debate grew louder, each thought a battle cry against the encroaching despair. Could he risk the elements for the chance to save these innocent lives, or would caution force him into an agonizing inaction? Gripped by a sense of urgency, the man recalled a long-forgotten winter when the stakes had been life and death for his own family. That memory, etched in the frost of his mind, reminded him that time was as relentless as the storm outside. With trembling determination, he moved towards a battered shelf where an old iron crowbar lay. Its surface, scarred by years of use, offered a semblance of hope, a tool that might just break the icy barrier holding them captive. Every scrape of the crowbar against the frozen wood resounded like a heartbeat, each metallic clang echoing in the stillness of the barn. With every determined heave, he fought not only the obstinate ice but also the creeping dread that threatened to immobilize him. The sound of cracking ice mingled with the howls of the wind, crafting a fragile bridge between despair and hope. His actions, driven by a mixture of duty and compassion, were a desperate plea to defy the odds. The mare's soulful eyes and the frail stance of the foal were all the encouragement he needed to push forward, even as the storm outside raged on with a vengeance. Yet, as the icy chains began to fracture under the relentless force of his resolve, an unexpected gust of wind rattled the barn with renewed ferocity. The structure shuddered, and for a heartbeat, the fragile balance between hope and disaster seemed to waver. In that suspended moment, the door inched open just a fraction, a narrow gap that offered a tantalizing glimpse of salvation, yet also beckoned the biting cold to rush in. The man paused, his mind a whirlwind of fear and anticipation. Would this small opening be enough to let in the warmth that could revive the weakened creatures, or would it usher in a torrent of frigid air that might snuff out the fragile spark of life? Inside, every heartbeat became a silent countdown, each second magnifying the stakes of his decision. The barn, with its peeling wood and brittle ice, was no longer just a shelter, it had transformed into a crucible where courage and despair met head-on. The man knew that to hesitate further was to court disaster. With one final, resolute push, he coaxed the door wider, feeling the crunch of broken ice underfoot and the surge of cold air as it mingled with the warmth inside. In that decisive moment, the man's struggle was no longer just a fight against the elements, it was a testament to the enduring power of compassion in the face of overwhelming adversity. In that critical moment when the icy grip of the door began to yield, the man's resolve hardened into a single, unyielding decision. With a determined push, he swung the door open just wide enough to let the raw, frigid air into the barn. The sudden rush of wind carried with it the stark reality of the outside world, a world that was as unforgiving as it was relentless. The man paused for only a heartbeat to absorb the shock of the cold blast, his breath coming out in quick, visible puffs, before turning his focus to the two lives that depended on him. As the door creaked wider, the mare's eyes locked onto his with a desperate trust. The animal stirred, as if understanding that the moment of reckoning had arrived. With a tentative step, the mare edged toward the opening, her weakened frame shivering in the blast of winter air. The foal, almost too fragile to move, wavered behind her, its small body fighting against the forces of nature. The man's heart pounded as he recognized that every second counted, each one a fragile bridge between survival and tragedy. Without a moment's hesitation, the man reached for his thick, worn coat, a garment that had seen many harsh winters, and wrapped it around his shoulders as if it were a talisman against the cold. He stepped out into the swirling snow, the crunch of frost underfoot echoing in the silence between the howls of the wind. His breath mingled with the flurries of snow, and his eyes scanned the expanse for anything that might offer a semblance of shelter or hope. Every step he took was measured, deliberate, and fraught with the weight of responsibility. He moved slowly towards the mare and her foal, whose forms were barely discernible against the white blur of the storm. The world outside was a tumult of ice and wind, a landscape that seemed determined to sap the warmth from every living creature. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the man's determination shone like a beacon of hope in the storm. As he reached the animals, the man gently knelt beside the mare. He spoke softly, his words barely audible above the roar of the wind, offering reassurance both to the animal and to himself. The mare, though in pain and struggling to remain conscious, leaned into his touch. Her eyes, filled with a mix of fear and trust, communicated more than words ever could. The foal, teetering on the edge of collapse, instinctively moved closer to its mother, seeking the comfort of her presence. Realizing that shelter was urgently needed, the man scanned the area. His gaze fell upon a small cluster of weathered wooden planks and a bundle of old blankets stored in a corner near the barn. In a flurry of decisive action, he gathered them, his hands trembling not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline of his mission. The man laid the blankets gently over the mare and foal, using his own body as a shield to create a temporary barrier against the biting wind. Each blanket was draped with care, every movement infused with the silent promise of protection. The wind howled louder as if protesting his efforts, and the man's muscles ached with the strain of his rapid yet careful movements. He fought against both the physical barrier of the cold and the inner tempest of worry that threatened to overwhelm him. Every breath was a struggle, every heartbeat a reminder that failure was not an option. The animal's survival hinged on this moment, on the courage it took to step out into the relentless storm and risk everything for a fragile chance at life. As he secured the blankets around the animals, the man noticed that the mare's breathing had become steadier, and the foal's shivers less pronounced. Though still weak and vulnerable, there was a spark of resilience in their eyes that mirrored his own. The man knew that the fight was far from over, the storm was still raging, and the cold was an ever-present enemy. Yet, in that precarious moment, a bond of mutual determination had been forged, a silent understanding that sometimes, the only way to overcome the harshness of life was to confront it head-on, no matter the cost. In the midst of the swirling snow, under a sky that offered little comfort, the man stood resolute. His choice to brave the elements was not born of recklessness, but of a deep-seated belief in the value of every life. The decision to open the barn door had been a leap of faith, a bold act of compassion that defied the odds and challenged the relentless forces of nature. As the wind continued to whip around them and the snow fell in endless sheets, the man remained by the side of the mare and her foal, a steadfast guardian in a moment when hope was as fragile as a flickering candle in the dark. As the man worked feverishly to shield the mare and her fragile foal from the biting wind, an unexpected sound began to rise above the clamor of the storm, a low, steady rumble that cut through the howling gusts. The sound grew louder, its rhythm oddly comforting amid the chaos. Squinting against the flurries of snow, the man noticed a faint glow on the horizon. Amid the swirling white, a battered pickup truck emerged, its headlights piercing the gloom like beacons of hope. The truck came to a gentle stop a few yards from the barn, and from it stepped a rugged, elderly man whose weathered face carried the quiet determination of someone who had faced countless winters before. Without a word, the stranger moved purposefully toward the barn, his gait steady despite the swirling snow. The man recognized in the newcomer the spirit of a longtime neighbor, a silent guardian in these parts, known more for his deeds than his words. With a nod of understanding, the neighbor immediately surveyed the scene. The mare's strained whinnies and the foal's feeble whimpers painted a picture of urgent distress. The newcomer wasted no time. From the back of his truck, he produced a bundle of thick, heavy blankets and a sturdy, oilskin tarp, tools clearly meant for more than just routine winter drives. The neighbor's eyes, deep with empathy, met the man's for a brief, unspoken moment of shared resolve. Working in tandem, they carefully lifted the blankets and draped them over the animals. The neighbor's experienced hands moved with gentle assurance, easing the tension in the air. As he tucked the tarp around the makeshift shelter they'd created, his voice, though soft, carried the weight of countless winters and the wisdom of knowing that help can come when least expected. He spoke little, but each word resonated with a deep understanding of the stakes. They were not merely saving animals, but preserving hope in the midst of nature's relentless fury. Once the animals were secure, the neighbor led the man outside to his pickup truck. The truck, though old, was a rugged relic that had weathered many storms. Inside, the cab was warm, a stark contrast to the icy chaos left behind. The man climbed in, and the neighbor started the engine, its rumble a steady, reassuring sound amid the howling wind. With a practiced hand, the neighbor radioed for additional assistance, ensuring that help would soon be on its way. The sense of isolation that had gripped the man just moments before began to lift, replaced by the reassuring presence of community support. As they drove through the tempest, the landscape transformed into an indistinct blur of white. The pickup bounced over uneven, icy patches, each jolt a reminder of the storm's relentless nature. Yet, every bump was met with a resolute calm on the neighbor's face, a testament to years spent navigating nature's harshest moods. The truck's headlights revealed a treacherous road littered with obstacles, and soon they encountered an unexpected challenge. A massive fallen branch sprawled across the icy path. For a moment, the vehicle shuddered to a stop, and the two men exchanged tense glances. The branch was a formidable barrier, a final test of their resolve. Without hesitation, the neighbor inspected the obstacle. His eyes quickly assessed the situation, and he explained in measured tones how they might use the truck's plow attachment, a rarely used feature that had always remained a silent backup. With a few adjustments and a surge of mechanical power, the truck resumed its journey, clearing the obstruction as if it were a minor hurdle rather than a catastrophic block. The moment of tension passed, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose as the truck forged ahead into the storm. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity battling the elements, the pickup pulled up in front of a modest farmhouse. The building, warmly lit from within, served as a temporary community shelter for those caught in nature's wrath. Here, in this unexpected sanctuary, a small team awaited to assist with emergency care. Carefully, the neighbor and the man unloaded the mare and her foal, cradling them as if they were the most precious cargo. Inside the shelter, soft blankets and gentle hands replaced the harsh wind, and the animals were quickly attended to by a local veterinarian who had been called in through the neighbor's earlier alert. In that moment, the air of despair that had once cloaked the frozen landscape was replaced by a palpable sense of relief and collective achievement. The neighbor's timely arrival and resourceful actions had turned what might have been a solitary, doomed struggle into a community rescue effort, a living testament to the power of compassion in the face of overwhelming adversity. As the man watched the veterinarian gently examine the mare and wrap the foal in additional blankets, a quiet smile crept across his face. Even amid nature's harshest conditions, the kindness of strangers had arrived just in time. The storm still raged outside, but within the warm refuge of the farmhouse, the chill had begun to fade. The man and the neighbor exchanged a look of mutual respect, a silent acknowledgement that sometimes, hope arrives in the most unexpected ways. The rescue was not just a physical salvation, it was a stirring reminder that even in life's darkest hours, community and compassion could light the path to survival. As dawn broke over the battered farmhouse, a soft, golden light began to seep through the windows, gently dispelling the remnants of the fierce storm. In the quiet aftermath, the man stood outside the shelter, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the tumult of the night had given way to a hopeful, new day. The mare, now resting more soundly, lay near the foal, both cocooned in layers of warm blankets. The rescued pair, symbols of fragility and endurance, had weathered the worst of the cold, and so had he. The man's heart was still heavy with the weight of the previous hours, yet it was now filled with a tender glow of reflection. In the soft morning light, he could see every detail of the rescue, the desperate struggle against the biting wind, the agonizing decision to open the frozen barn door, and the valiant stand against a winter that threatened to consume them all. Each memory was etched in his mind, a testament to the fierce compassion that had driven him to defy nature's cruelty. Sitting on a weathered bench outside the farmhouse, the man allowed himself a moment of quiet introspection. He recalled the piercing cold and the haunting whimpers of the foal, the mare's silent, pleading eyes that had spurred him into action. That desperate night, when fear and uncertainty had clashed within him, he had chosen to act, not out of recklessness, but from a deep-seated belief in the value of life. The decision to open the barn door had been a leap of faith, a courageous defiance of the odds that had ultimately paved the way for salvation. In the days that followed, as the storm's memory gradually faded into the annals of winter's harsh legacy, the man began to see the rescue not merely as an act of bravery, but as a powerful reminder of the human spirit's capacity to transform despair into hope. Neighbors spoke of his deed with quiet admiration, recounting how, in a moment of overwhelming darkness, one man's determination had kindled a light that extended far beyond the confines of the cold, isolated barn. The community's support, the unexpected arrival of the kind stranger with his weathered truck, the swift mobilization of local help, and the shared relief at the animal's recovery, had reinforced a timeless truth: in the face of life's harshest trials, unity and compassion can mend even the most broken moments.